In 1944, as the last echoes of war swept across southern Italy, 3 soldiers arrived at the gates of an isolated Capuchin monastery. Their uniforms were torn by rain and silence. Behind the iron bars, a single monk watched them through the fog, his lantern trembling against the cold stone. That night the men entered the monastery. They were never seen again. 42 years later, an aging friar, one of the last who remembered that winter, found something sealed behind the chapel's wall. It would reveal not only what happened to those soldiers, but why the church kept quiet for decades. Why did faith demand silence that night, and what secret was buried beneath those sacred stones? For generations, believers wondered if it was divine punishment or divine protection. By the end of this story, you'll understand the truth hidden inside the monastery of San Michele and the mystery that still breathes through its corridors. Welcome to Bible Stories and Mysteries. Like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more forgotten miracles and faith mysteries. The monastery of San Michele stood alone on the mountainside, breathing the cold air of a winter that would not end. The war had reached the valley, and the brothers prayed each night that its darkness would not climb the hill. But on that January evening of 1944, 3 soldiers emerged through the fog, silent, exhausted, their uniforms heavy with rain. Fra Leone, the gatekeeper, heard the faint rattle of their weapons before he saw their faces. He raised his lantern, and its light touched eyes that no longer believed in victory. They asked for shelter. Leone hesitated. The rule of charity bound him to mercy, yet something in the men's silence felt heavier than sin. Still, he opened the gate. The iron groaned, and the night seemed to follow them inside. They ate little, spoke less. One of them crossed himself before the bread. Another stared at the crucifix above the table, his lips trembling without words. When they finally slept, their breath sounded like prayers that no longer reached heaven. At midnight, the bells did not ring. Only the wind circled the tower, carrying a voice too faint to understand. The candles inside the chapel bent toward the altar, as if drawn by an unseen breath. The air smelled of wax and iron. Before dawn, Fra Leone awoke to footsteps. He followed the faint sound through the corridor until he reached the chapel. The soldiers were gone, their bunks undisturbed, their rifles missing. Only 3 sets of footprints led to the wall beside the altar and stopped there. The abbot ordered silence. "God's will is not ours to question," he said. A letter was sent to the diocese, brief, obedient. 3 soldiers sought refuge. By morning, they had vanished. No reply ever came. Weeks passed. The war rolled on, leaving the monastery untouched, as if fear itself had spared it. Yet each night Fra Leone left a candle by that wall. He watched its flame tremble and whispered the words of the psalm, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." When dawn came, the candle was always gone. Only a trace of wax remained, shaped like a tear on the stone. Fra Leone began to wonder if the soldiers had been taken or called. The war ended. Peace returned. But the silence stayed. And in that silence, something still listened. The monastery slept beneath its secret, and heaven, perhaps, remembered what earth had chosen to forget. 4 decades later, the monastery stood almost unchanged. The olive trees still leaned toward the courtyard. The wind still carried the same thin bell tone over the hills of southern Italy. Yet inside its walls, memory had begun to decay. Brother Tommaso, 68 years old and nearly blind, walked those corridors every dawn with a rosary in hand. He had been a novice when the soldiers disappeared. The abbot back then had sworn the brothers to silence, but the memory of that night had never left him. He remembered the smell of rain, the look on Fra Leone's face, the sound that came from the chapel just before the first light. It was not a cry, not a prayer, more like the breath of something vast and unseen. Tommaso had tried to forget, but faith does not erase. It remembers through silence. In the winter of 1986, restoration work began on the old chapel. The walls had cracked, the paint had faded. Tommaso helped where he could, guiding the younger monks with trembling hands. While brushing dust from the altar, he noticed a seam in the wall that had not been there before, a faint line beneath layers of plaster. He pressed his palm against it. The stone was colder than the rest. That night, he dreamed of footsteps echoing inside the monastery, 3 voices whispering in languages he could not recognize. When he awoke, his lantern had burned out, though he swore he had not lit it. The next evening, he returned to the chapel alone. The others were asleep. The corridor was silent except for the slow dripping of water from the roof. Tommaso carried his lantern close to the wall, watching the flame tremble against the crack. Then he heard it, a hollow resonance, the faint sound of air moving behind the stone. He fetched a small chisel from the tool chest and began to scrape. Dust filled the air, soft and grey like ash. After several strokes, the plaster gave way to a narrow gap. Cold air escaped, smelling of earth and candle smoke long extinguished. Something shimmered inside, a metal cross, half buried in dust, and beside it, a strip of fabric. Military, faded green, a button still attached. Tommaso's breath caught. The memory of 1944 returned in full weight. He fell to his knees. "Lord, have mercy." "They never left," he whispered. He stayed there for hours, staring into the darkness of the cavity. Behind the small cross, deeper in the wall, something else glimmered. A silver tag, dull with age, engraved with a number and a name no one had spoken in 42 years. As dawn approached, Tommaso covered the opening again, sealing the secret with trembling hands. He did not tell the abbot, not yet. He felt that what he had touched was not simply a grave, but a covenant. For the first time in decades, he heard the old bells ring in his dreams, slow, mournful, as if the monastery itself had begun to confess. And when he awoke, the candle near the altar was already burning. The mystery had awakened with him. For several nights after his discovery, Brother Tommaso could not sleep. He walked the corridors of San Michele with a lantern in hand, listening to the wind that whispered along the stone. The monastery felt awake in ways it hadn't for decades, its silence no longer peaceful, but expectant. Each creak of wood, each flutter of a candle carried meaning, and in that stillness Tommaso began to feel watched. The other monks noticed his distraction. During morning prayers, his voice faltered. During meals, his hands trembled as if the air itself had grown heavier. The abbot asked if he was unwell. Tommaso only nodded, unwilling to speak what pressed on his heart, because what he felt could not be confessed easily. It was not guilt. It was presence. On the 5th night, the temperature dropped suddenly. Frost gathered on the chapel windows, forming strange circular patterns that looked almost like halos. The candles dimmed, though no wind entered. And then, barely audible, came the sound of marching. Slow, distant. 3 steps, then silence. Tommaso froze. The sound returned, 3 more steps echoing faintly beneath the floor. He knelt, pressing his ear to the cold stone. Nothing, only his heartbeat, fast and frightened. He whispered a prayer anyway, not for protection, but for understanding. As he rose, a flicker of light caught his eye. One candle near the altar burned brighter than the rest, its flame rising straight and still. The wall behind it glowed faintly, as if something beneath the plaster reflected the fire. The next morning, when he returned with tools, the light was gone, but the sense of being observed remained. He began to keep notes, a hidden journal beneath his mattress, recording every sound, every draft, every flicker. He wrote, "Faith demands silence, but silence now speaks. The air carries memories." Each entry grew more desperate. He described a faint smell of gunpowder near the altar, the echo of dripping water where none should be, the feeling that someone prayed beside him when the chapel was empty. By the end of the week, he was certain, the monastery was remembering. During Vespers, when the brothers sang psalms, Tommaso heard a 4th voice join them, a low, steady tone that did not come from any of the monks. The sound trembled through the stone like breath through a flute. The brothers looked around, confused, but said nothing. Fear and reverence share the same silence. That night, Tommaso confronted the abbot. He spoke of the soldiers, of the wall, of what he had found hidden there. The abbot's face turned pale. He whispered only one sentence. Some truths are not meant to be dug out from holy ground. But Tommaso could not accept that. He felt that whatever was buried beneath the chapel had been left not by accident but by purpose. and that purpose now demanded to be seen. As he left the abbot's chamber, the wind outside howled like a choir of lost voices. The bells rang on their own, 3 slow tolls. Every candle in the corridor flickered, the walls seemed to breathe. And from somewhere deep within the monastery came a sound that froze him in place. Metal striking stone, as though someone somewhere was knocking from the inside. He turned, lantern trembling in his hands, and whispered into the dark, "If you still walk these halls, may light find you." The air shifted, cold yet peaceful. The flame of his lantern steadied. And for a brief fleeting second, Tommaso thought he saw 3 shadows pass across the chapel wall, moving together, heads bowed, as if still on guard. Then they were gone. He stood there, breathing the dust of centuries, his heart torn between fear and awe. Was this divine mercy or divine unrest? He no longer knew. But one thing was certain, the monastery was not silent anymore. And somewhere behind that wall, the truth waited like a heartbeat that refused to die. The morning after the bells rang on their own, Brother Tommaso could no longer contain his unrest. He waited until the monastery fell into its afternoon stillness, when the others prayed in the courtyard, and carried his tools quietly to the chapel. The air inside felt heavier, as if saturated with memory. Light from the stained glass windows bled across the floor, painting the stone with colors too somber to be holy. He placed his lantern near the altar and knelt beside the wall where he had found the soldier's relic weeks before. His hands trembled, but his purpose did not. He began to scrape the plaster again, piece by piece, whispering between breaths, "Forgive me, Lord, if what I seek is not mine to find." Hours passed in silence. Only the rhythm of his chisel echoed through the chapel, steady, reverent, almost like prayer. Then, suddenly, the tool broke through to emptiness. The hollow space beyond breathed out a wave of cold air that smelled of earth and wax. He widened the opening. Behind the wall was a small chamber, narrow, hidden, untouched since the war. His lantern's light revealed wooden beams blackened by time, a rusted metal cross on the floor, and 3 bundles of cloth half buried in dust. He knew what they were before he touched them. The remains of the soldiers lay there, wrapped in the brown blankets of the monastery. Around them, rosaries and medals had been placed, offerings from hands that once trembled with guilt. One skull still wore a military tag. Tommaso fell to his knees. The breath in his chest turned to prayer. He traced the sign of the cross and whispered, "Rest now, sons of God. Rest." Then he noticed something else. Carved into the back wall of the chamber was a single Latin phrase, shallow and rough, as if etched in haste. "Silentium Dei non est vacuum." The silence of God is not empty. His tears blurred the letters. It was not a message left by the soldiers. It was written by a monk, perhaps Fra Leone himself. He understood then that the brothers had not murdered the soldiers. They had buried them to protect something sacred. The men had taken refuge, perhaps confided a secret, and died in that sanctuary. Whether by accident, illness, or judgment, none could now tell. But the inscription spoke louder than any confession. The silence had been their obedience and their burden. Tommaso stepped back, overwhelmed by the stillness. The lantern's flame bent, casting his shadow over the bones. For a moment it seemed that the shadow bowed in prayer beside him. A faint sound followed, a whisper, low and fragile, carried through the chamber like breath through a reed. "We were heard." He froze. The voice was neither echo nor imagination. It was soft, almost grateful. Then it was gone, leaving the air lighter than before. Tommaso wept. The fear that had haunted him dissolved into reverence. For the first time he felt peace within those walls, but peace in sacred ground rarely lasts. He reported what he had found to the abbot that evening. The man listened without moving, hands folded tightly on the table. When Tommaso mentioned the inscription, the abbot's eyes darkened. "You should not have gone there," he said. "What was buried in obedience must remain in obedience." "Father," Tommaso pleaded, "they were not enemies. They died under our roof. Shouldn't they be honored?" The abbot rose slowly. His voice carried both sorrow and authority. "You don't understand. There were orders from Rome long ago. The soldiers carried something. something the church feared might be misused. They found refuge here. Leone kept it hidden beneath the altar, sealed with them when they died. Tommaso's blood turned cold. "Something sacred?" he asked. The abbot nodded once. "A relic. One that was never meant to be found." The words echoed through the room like a judgment. A relic buried beneath the chapel, guarded by silence, sealed by sacrifice. That night, Tommaso returned to his cell, unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the phrase carved in the wall, "The silence of God is not empty." He began to wonder, was the relic still there, hidden deeper beneath the bones? And if it was, what power could compel men of faith to bury not only soldiers but the truth itself? Outside, the wind rose through the cloister, shaking the olive trees, and from the chapel, faintly, the bells began to ring again. 3 slow tolls, measured and solemn, as if the monastery itself remembered the vow it had broken. The secret was stirring once more. That night, Brother Tommaso did not pray. He sat by the small window of his cell, watching the mist roll down from the hills. The bells had fallen silent again, but he could still hear their echo in his chest, steady and sorrowful. The inscription haunted him, "The silence of God is not empty." The monastery seemed to breathe in his hesitation. Every wall felt alive, listening. Every flicker of light looked like an answer that refused to form into words. He tried to sleep, but failed. At dawn, he went to the chapel once more. The air was colder now, sharp enough to sting his lungs. He knelt before the altar, whispering the same question over and over. "Lord, what was it they died protecting?" As if in response, a faint beam of sunlight entered through the stained glass, striking the floor exactly where the soldiers' footprints had once ended. The light trembled, reflecting from something metallic beneath the stone. Tommaso leaned closer. Beneath the worn tiles, a small seam revealed itself. It was a square of cement, slightly different in color, barely noticeable, sealed long ago. His hands shook. The relic was there. He knew it. He ran to the abbot's chamber. The door opened before he knocked. The abbot had not slept either. He sat at his desk, the same unread letter from Rome lying open beside a candle. "You went back," the abbot said quietly. Tommaso nodded. "Father, the soldiers, what they protected, it's still beneath the chapel. We must tell the church. They deserve truth." The abbot's eyes closed as if under a great weight. "Truth is not always the path of faith, Brother Tommaso. Sometimes it is temptation wearing holy words." Tommaso's voice broke. "They were buried in silence, forgotten. That cannot be God's will." The abbot rose, his robe brushing the floor like a slow tide. "You think God needs you to defend his memory." Leone obeyed. He sealed them because Rome commanded it. That relic was never to be seen again. Tommaso stepped forward. "Then Rome must have feared something greater than war." The abbot turned away. "Yes," he said after a long pause, "they feared proof." The word fell like thunder. Proof. Of what? Tommaso dared not ask. But the abbot continued, voice trembling. "It was said the soldiers carried a reliquary taken from a ruined church near Monte Cassino. Inside it, a vial, believed to hold a drop of blood from the crucifixion itself. Leone hid it to prevent desecration. When the soldiers died, he sealed it with them. And then he prayed never to speak of it again." Tommaso's breath caught. "You knew all along?" The abbot nodded, eyes glistening. "I was sworn to silence. The Vatican wanted it forgotten. If such a relic were real, it could unmake faith as easily as it could renew it." The wind struck the windows, shaking the candles. The flame bent sideways, almost extinguished. Tommaso looked toward the chapel door, where shadows quivered like uncertain souls. "Father, I cannot keep silence any longer. If they died protecting that blood, their sacrifice must speak," the abbot whispered. "And if speaking destroys what little belief remains in this world?" Tommaso stared at him, torn between obedience and truth. Faith built on silence is only fear wearing a cross. Neither man moved for a long time. Then the abbot took the old key from his robe pocket and placed it on the table. "If you open it," he said, "you will carry the consequence alone." The key was cold in Tommaso's palm, heavy with history. That night he returned to the chapel. The lantern's glow touched the floor like liquid gold. He could still feel the breath of the 3 soldiers in the air, their memory folded into the stones. He knelt, pressing the key into the crack between the tiles. It turned easily, as if waiting for him all these years. The slab lifted, revealing a small iron box wrapped in decayed cloth. Inside it lay the reliquary, a glass vial sealed in bronze, dark liquid shimmering faintly within. It was beautiful, terrifying, alive. As he lifted it, a single drop of light escaped through the glass, reflecting on his face like the flame of a living soul. For a moment, the entire chapel seemed to inhale. The candles brightened, the air grew warm, almost tender, and then, as quickly as it came, the warmth vanished. From the far corner of the chapel, Tommaso heard a breath, a whisper that carried both blessing and warning. "Remember why we were silenced." He turned, but saw only his own shadow trembling against the wall. He clutched the reliquary to his chest, heart racing. The divine silence had broken, but he did not yet know if heaven was speaking or warning him to stop. And outside, the bells of San Michele began to ring once more, 3 solemn tones, echoing through the valley like the heartbeat of something eternal. The relic's glow dimmed in Brother Tommaso's hands as if it were breathing, inhaling the weight of centuries, exhaling the burden of hidden truth. The chapel around him seemed alive, walls sighing, candles bending, wind weaving through the arches like a whisper of time itself. He stared at the glass vial. The liquid inside shimmered faintly red under the lantern's trembling flame. It looked like blood suspended between worlds, not dead, not alive, only waiting. Tommaso fell to his knees. "If this is truly yours," he whispered, "then forgive us for hiding it." The air shifted. The candles brightened for a heartbeat, then steadied. He felt warmth spread through his chest, not fire, but light. It filled him with a peace that tasted of tears. For a moment he thought he heard the voices of the 3 soldiers, faint and far. We kept it safe. His tears dropped onto the floor, mixing with the dust. The reliquary pulsed once, softly, as if answering his grief. But faith, he knew, was never meant to rest easy. Behind him, the abbot entered the chapel quietly. His steps were slow, burdened by years of secrecy. He saw the relic in Tommaso's hands, the light reflecting on both their faces, one trembling with awe, the other with dread. "You opened it," the abbot said, his voice breaking. "I had to," Tommaso replied. "If it is real, the world deserves to see it." The abbot shook his head, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. "The world no longer listens to miracles, my son. It only doubts them." Tommaso rose to his feet, holding the relic close. "Then let this light fall where it may. Doubt can only grow where truth is buried." The abbot stepped closer. The 2 men stood before the altar, age and faith, obedience and conviction. Between them, the reliquary glowed like a wound that would never heal. Outside, the wind began to rise. The bells trembled but did not ring. "You think the world will believe you," the abbot whispered. "They will call it heresy. They will take this monastery apart, stone by stone." "Then let them," Tommaso said softly. "Perhaps what is sacred was never meant to be safe." The abbot's lips quivered. He looked at the light and fell to his knees. "All my life," he murmured, "I thought silence was obedience, but maybe silence is only fear pretending to be faith." Tommaso knelt beside him. They prayed together without words, only breath. The light from the vial glowed stronger, spreading across the floor like dawn. Then something extraordinary happened. From the wall where the soldiers had been buried, the faint outline of 3 silhouettes appeared, not as ghosts, but as light itself taking form. Their shapes were gentle, bowed, peaceful. The 2 men watched in silence as the figures lifted their gaze toward the cross above the altar. A single beam of sunlight broke through the storm clouds outside and struck the reliquary. The light refracted, spilling across the chapel in golden fragments, bathing everything in warmth. The monks sleeping in their cells awoke to the radiance seeping under their doors. They gathered silently at the chapel entrance, eyes wide, breaths held. No one dared speak. The abbot looked at Tommaso, tears flowing freely. "This is not punishment," he whispered. "This is mercy remembering itself." The figures faded slowly, dissolving into the light until only the sound of wind remained. Tommaso placed the reliquary on the altar. Its glow dimmed to a soft ember, as if content to rest. The air felt lighter, purified. For the first time since that winter of 1944, the monastery's silence was no longer heavy. It was holy. Days later, the abbot sent word to the diocese, not to report a relic, but to confess a miracle of reconciliation. No explanation was offered, none was needed. The church chose silence again, but not the same kind. This time it was reverent, not fearful. Brother Tommaso spent his remaining years tending the garden near the chapel. He never left the monastery again. Visitors who met him said his hands carried warmth, as if the light had stayed beneath his skin. When asked about the night of the discovery, he would only smile and say, "Some secrets are not hidden to be feared. They are hidden to be found by faith." And when the bells of San Michele rang at dusk, they no longer sounded like mourning. They rang like forgiveness. He died at peace, with the dawn filtering through the same stained glass that once held the shadow of war. The reliquary was never found again, but the legend of the three soldiers, the monk, and the light beneath the chapel spread through the valley, whispered not as proof but as hope. Because sometimes the silence of God is not absence, it is preparation for the moment we are finally ready to listen. In the hills of southern Italy, the monastery of San Michele still stands. Its bells still ring 3 times each evening, not for mourning but for remembrance. No one speaks of the soldiers or the relic, or the night the chapel filled with light. But pilgrims who visit say they feel something in the air, a warmth that does not come from candles or sun. Maybe it is faith reclaiming its place among ruins. Maybe it is forgiveness echoing through stone. Or maybe it is simply a reminder that silence too can be divine. Because faith is not always about answers. Sometimes it is about carrying questions long enough for them to become prayers. If this story moved you, comment below. Faith remains. Share it with someone who still believes that hope survives even in silence. And remember to subscribe and turn on the bell for more stories where mystery, faith, and the unseen meet beneath the light of redemption.